Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
Hey, I'm Mark Wingfield with Baptist News Global.
And I'm Brian Henderson with the Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists.
And together we want to invite you to a very special event happening in St. Louis this summer.
That's right. At the CBF General Assembly on Wednesday, June 25th, BNG and AWAB will be hosting a breakfast together.
And we have a special guest speaker who's very important to both of us.
That's right, for different reasons. Paul Rauschenbusch will be with us, and we can't wait for you to hear him.
Paul is a really important figure in speaking against Christian nationalism today, bringing together people of different faiths to stand together for the things we believe in. And we hope you come join us and hear him this summer.
That's right. All you need to do is register at cbf.net, and we look forward to seeing you on June 25th.
We hope to see you in St. Louis.
Next week, I'll be attending the 2025 Cooperative Baptist Fellowship General Assembly in St. Louis. And this will be my third year attending, and it's always been a really fun opportunity to meet people. I know a few other writers from BNG are planning to be there as well, so if you're there, feel free to come up and say hi. We'll probably be hanging out a bit at the BNG booth, and I know I'll be walking around looking for some interviews for the podcast as well. But for today's show, I'd like to deal with an issue I'm noticing this week, because whether we're talking about the shooting in Minnesota, or the potential war in Iran, or immigration, in each of these stories, MAGA is giving us two choices, neither of which make any sense. So we're going to look at all three of these stories and consider how their false dichotomies are setting us up for harm. First off is the assassination in Minnesota. The first audio clip I want to play is from the independent charismatic apostle Lance Wallnau. If you listened to last Thursday's episode, which was episode 30, you may remember I shared a story about a conversation between Wallnau and Trump in 2015. If you haven't listened to that, I'd highly recommend going back and checking it out. It gives a lot of very key context to why Trump began targeting white evangelicals when he started running for office. So last Saturday, when the news broke that Vance Bolter had allegedly assassinated Democratic Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark, and shot State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette, shortly after the news broke, conspiracies began to spread online that Bolter was a Democrat, a radical leftist who was appointed by Governor Tim Walz to a task force and who was upset that the Democrats weren't liberal enough. Of course, all that was misconstrued, and I dealt with a number of those conspiracies in Monday's episode. As it turns out, Bolter is actually a MAGA Republican, a supporter of Trump, and an independent charismatic preacher who trained at Christ for the Nations in Dallas. And if you paid much attention to my writing over the past few years, or to the commentary of others like Matthew D. Taylor, you're well aware that these independent charismatics of the New Apostolic Reformation were highly involved with the lead-up to the January 6th insurrection. They can't be in favor of assassination, and they have to project onto liberals the evil their own people perpetrate. So Lance Wallnau shared a theory on Flashpoint about what he thinks is going on with the Bolter story.
You know, the whole thing is mentally ill. The whole thing is imbalanced. And I was thinking while I'm listening to this, that shooting that happened in Washington with that beautiful young Jewish couple, the crazy guy throwing Molotov cocktails on Jewish people in Colorado, what they have in common is Christianity does give you a sound mind. If it's done right, what the Apostle Paul prayed is that God didn't give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. And boy, am I grateful that there's a solution to this mental illness that causes other people to go to that level of crazy.
Wallnau's theory is that Christianity gives you a sound mind. This means that in Wallnau's world, the solution is to double down on their theology. So what is Wallnau's theology? In a piece I wrote back on January 10th, 2023, titled "The New Apostolic Reformation Drove the January 6th Riots, so why was it overlooked by the House Select Committee?" I shared how Wallnau believes in the Seven Mountain Mandate, where Christians have an obligation to have dominion over the 7 mountains of religion, education, family, business, government, the arts, and media. Also, he believes in a concept called the ecclesia. You may have heard this term being used in reference to the church, the gathering, or the assembly. But in the world of the New Apostolic Reformation, they translate it in the context of its original usage in the Roman Empire to mean divinely ordained ruling government. In other words, the ecclesia no longer simply means Christians gathering for worship, but ruling over the United States government. So, in Wallnau's world, the Great Commission then becomes making disciples of all nations, with the emphasis on making disciples not simply of individuals, but of the nations themselves. In a piece from June 16th titled Radical Christian Theology Appears to Have Shaped Minnesota's Shooter, BNG's Jeff Brumley shared a quote from Matthew D. Taylor, who is a senior scholar at the Institute for Christian, Jewish, and Islamic Studies in Baltimore and the author of the book The Violent Take It by Force, The Christian Movement That Is Threatening Our Democracy. And Taylor said, "What I could gather from a quick survey of his, Bolter's, life is, and digital history, is that he is somebody who has dipped into the world that surrounds the New Apostolic Reformation, has spent some time in charismatic leadership circles, has some ties in that world, and that seems to have played some role in his radicalization." So the false dichotomy that Wallnau is setting up is that if you agree with his version of Christianity, you'll have a sound mind, and that if you disagree with his version of Christianity, you won't be of a sound mind, and might be violent. And by creating this false dichotomy, Wallnau is refusing to acknowledge how his version of Christianity radicalizes people to turn spiritual warfare into physical warfare. It's no wonder, in a world that defines its relationship with its neighbors as having dominion over them and fighting spiritual warfare against them, that Bolter allegedly texted his family, "Dad went to war last night." In a similar story, we also have Trump responding to reporters' questions about whether or not he's spoken with Governor Walz.
Have you called the governor yet or been able to speak to any of them?
I don't really call him. He appointed this guy to a position. I think the governor of Minnesota is so whacked out. I'm not calling him. He's a mess. So, I could be nice and call him, but why waste time?
Again, just like Wallnau, Trump essentially says Walz isn't of a sound mind, that he's, quote, whacked out. Why? Because Walz doesn't agree with Trump's politics. And notice how Trump said he could be nice and call him, but why waste time? He's creating a false dichotomy that you either have to agree with Trump or you're mentally ill. And then because of that, he says it's a waste of time to be nice to mentally ill people. Now on to the potential war with Iran. And a lot of this part of the discussion is going to center around Tucker Carlson. First up is a clip of Carlson versus Ted Cruz.
How many people live in Iran, by the way?
I don't know the population.
At all?
No, I don't know the population.
You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple?
How many people live in Iran?
92 million.
Okay. Yeah,
How could you not know that?
I don't sit around memorizing population tables.
Well, it's kind of relevant because you're calling for the overthrow of the government.
Why is it relevant whether it's 90 million or 80 million or 100 million? Why is that relevant?
Because if you don't know anything about the country...
I didn't say I don't know anything about
Okay, what's the ethnic mix of Iran?
They are Persians and predominantly Shia. Okay, this is cute.
It's not
okay.
even... You don't know anything about Iran. So
okay, I am not the Tucker Carlson expert on Iran.
You're a senator who's calling for the overthrow of the government.
You're the one who
don't know anything about the country.
No, you don't know anything about the country. You're the one who claims they're not trying to murder Donald Trump. You're the
I'm
one
not saying that.
who can't figure out if it was a good idea to kill General Soleimani, and you said it was bad.
You don't believe they're trying to murder Trump.
Yes, I do.
Because you're not calling for military strikes against them in retaliation. And if you really believe that...
We're carrying out military strikes today.
You said Israel was.
Right, with our help. I said we. Israel is leading them, but we're supporting them.
Well, you're breaking news here because the U.S. government last night denied, the National Security Council spokesman Alex Pfeiffer denied on behalf of Trump that we were acting on Israel's behalf in any offensive capacity.
No, we're not bombing them. Israel's bombing them.
You just said we were.
We are supporting
Israel.
Israel.
High stakes. You're a senator. If you're saying the United States government is at war with Iran right now, people are listening.
Okay.
So according to Carlson, if you don't know the population of Iran, then you don't know anything about Iran, and shouldn't call for the U.S. to go to a war against them. Also, if Cruz believes Iran is trying to call for the assassination of Trump, then Cruz should supposedly call for the U.S. to go to war against Iran. Later in the episode, Cruz creates this false dichotomy that if you criticize Israel, you might be an anti-Semite.
Seem to be sincere.
By the way, Tucker, it's a very weird thing. The obsession with Israel, when we're talking about foreign countries,
it's hardly an obsession.
You're not talking about Chinese, you're not talking about Japanese, you're not talking about the Brits, you're not talking about the French. The question, what about the Jews? What about the Jews?
Oh, like I'm an anti-Semite now. Senator,
you're asking the questions, Tucker. You're asking, why are the Jews controlling our foreign policy?
Senator,
that's what you just asked.
Hardly saying that, and I have.
That is exactly what you just said.
Well, actually, it's interesting you're trying to derail my questions by calling me an anti-Semite, which you are.
I did not.
Of course you are. And rather than be honorable enough to say it right to my face, you are in a sleazy feline way implying it, or just asking questions about the Jews. I'm not asking questions about the Jews. There's nothing to do with Jews or Judaism. It has to do with the foreign government.
Isn't Israel controlling our foreign policy? That's not about the Jews.
You said, I'm asking you.
And by the way, you're the one that just called me, I think, a sleazy feline. So let's be clear.
It's sleazy to imply that I'm an anti-Semite, which you just did.
No, I just said, why is that the only question you're asking? You answer it. Give me another reason. If you're not an anti-Semite, give me another reason why the obsession is Israel.
I am in no sense obsessed with Israel. We are on the brink of war with Iran. And so these are valid questions.
But you're not asking about Iran or the Ayatollah.
If I can finish, you asked me why I'm obsessed with Israel.
Yep.
3 minutes after telling me that when you first ran for Congress, you elucidated one of your main goals, which is to defend Israel.
Yes.
And I'm the one who's obsessed with Israel. I don't see a lawmaker's job as defending the interests of a foreign government, period. Okay. Any government, including the ones that my ancestors come from. So that's my position. That does not make me an anti-Semite. And shame on you for suggesting otherwise. And I mean that. And that's low, and you know it's low. So why don't you just answer my questions
I'll answer
in a straightforward, rational way? You certainly have the IQ to do it.
Shame on you is cute, by the way, Tucker.
It is. It's not cute. I'm offended. I'm obsessed with the Jews. You just told me
you just called me a sleazy feline.
It is sleazy to imply that I'm an anti-Semite for asking questions about how my government is run.
You want to count how many questions you asked about? What about the Jews? What about Israel? What about AIPAC?
I never asked about the Jews. This has nothing to do with the Jews, whatever.
These are false dichotomies. And perhaps the most ridiculous one of all is how we're pitting MAGA versus MAGA, Carlson versus Cruz, as if somehow those are our two choices. Then, of course, we had Trump versus Tucker.
One more, Canada, now that you're here, you still think you should be criticizing you, saying that you were complicit in the war.
I don't know what Tucker Carlson is saying. Let him go get a television network and say it so that people listen. Thank you.
So Trump supposedly has no idea what Tucker is saying because you have to have a show on television to be worth listening to. Never mind the fact that Trump won the election much in part due to going on podcasts with people who didn't have TV deals. But again, it's a false dichotomy. It's the idea that you either have a TV deal or you're not worth listening to. Then there's the conversation between Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon. They start with a false dichotomy about our choices at the polling booth.
Donald J. Trump gets elected in November on the back of this amazing coalition, unprecedented coalition, different parts of American society. You never thought of anything in common. Trump paints a picture that makes it really obvious that the old structure, left versus right, Democrat versus Republican, is basically BS and a control device, I think. This is my interpretation anyway. So he creates this brand new coalition. New York Times writes almost nothing about it because it's such a massive threat. But this coalition, which you described earlier and more precisely than anybody by far, is the defining fact of American politics. And it kind of feels like it's being blown up over this war in Iran.
They're saying there was a false dichotomy between the left and the right, but that both of those options were essentially the same. So the only other alternative was voting for Trump. In other words, they're using a false dichotomy in order to set up a false dichotomy that assumes that the only right choice was voting for Trump. Here's more.
Well, I think if you look at the three planks, stop the forever wars, seal the border and deport the illegal alien, invaders, and redo the commercial relationships in the world around trade deals and bring high value added manufacturing jobs back here. They're trying to shut all three down, right? But the one that they're obsessed with the most, which I find strange, is the forever wars. They've got to be in the forever wars, and particularly in the Middle East. I mean, this is what, and I'm a big supporter of Israel.
Yes.
And I'm telling people, hey, if we get sucked into this war, which inexorably looks like it's going to happen on the combat side, it's going to not just blow up the coalition, it's also going to thwart what we're doing with the most important thing, which is the deportation of the illegal alien invaders that are here. If we don't do that, we don't have a country. And you just see right now, they're doubling, tripling out. This is actually potentially a real civil war in our biggest cities. And President Trump has to have our backing. And this came out of nowhere. I mean, the trade deals you saw, he put together Liberation Day, but they've been thinking about it a long time. I mean, Trump's been talking about this since Lou Dobbs back in the 90s. He lays that out there. It's very sophisticated. He's got Scott Bessent running around with Lutnick. They're trying to make these deals. He sealed the border already in the first 60 days. Now we're really going down and actually having the deportation, see the fight. And then out of nowhere comes a war with Persia. It's like a shooting war with Persia, a massive shooting war with Persia. It's like, how did this happen? And that's why I've been up as a defender of Israel and someone that's very pro-Israel. I've been saying, hey, this is going to be the end of Israel because of the way these decisions have been made.
So now they're setting up a false dichotomy that you either have to be in favor of going to war with Iran or with having a civil war in our cities as we deport immigrants. But are these really our only two choices? Like, oh, we'd better support sending troops to Iran now so that they won't be sent to Los Angeles. Later in their conversation, they get into this false dichotomy between Americanism and nationalism, and start arguing against other conservatives like Mark Levin or Ben Shapiro. In the world of MAGA foreign policy, it's like you either have to be a war hawk or an isolationist. Those are your two options. But perhaps Bannon's fear that a war in Iran might detract from a war in Los Angeles reveals the biggest concern of the most dangerous within the MAGA movement. For people like Bannon, the biggest concern and highest priority is immigration. And that brings me to my final topic of the day. And to deal with this, I'd like to interact with a piece that was released on June 18th by Mark Wingfield, titled, "Now Josh Howerton is Giving Advice on Loving Trump's Immigration Plans." Wingfield shares how Howerton posted a series of images on Instagram to prove that Trump's immigration policies are actually biblical. And the false dichotomies in Howerton's arguments are through the roof. Howerton says, quote, "Christians are going to have to think biblically about illegal immigration and deportation, and when emotion gets high, logic gets low," unquote. Consider his words in light of these three passages about high emotion in the Gospels. Matthew 9:36 says, "When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless." Do you think that might be applicable in any way to the way immigrants are being harassed and are helpless? Matthew 26:37 and 38. "He took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee and began to be grieved and agitated. Then he said to them, 'My soul is deeply grieved, even to death.'" And then John 11:35, "Jesus wept." If Howerton's dichotomy is right, then Jesus' logic was low. And as one reader pointed out on social media today, when emotion gets low, cruelty tends to go high. In one of Howerton's points, he says, the conversation is not about loving immigrants, it's about punishing criminals. Then Howerton claims Jesus never broke immigration laws of the Roman Empire. But as Wingfield asks rhetorically in his piece, quote, "Just what were the immigration laws of the Roman Empire? Nothing akin to modern laws, except for the part where they allowed some people to earn citizenship," unquote. Then Wingfield says, quote, "Go back to junior high world history and refresh yourself on what it meant to be a citizen in the Roman Empire. Howerton's comparison here is ludicrous," unquote. Howerton says, in the Bible, God establishes borders, nations, and border walls. So in order to be biblical, we need to build a wall on our southern border? Again, false dichotomy. Howerton says, nations build walls for the same reason you have a lock on your front door, not because you hate the people on the outside, but because you love the people on the inside. So if we love U.S. citizens, we have to support Trump's desire to build a wall on our southern border? Again, false dichotomy. Howerton says, If a nation's leaders care for another nation's citizens in a way it harms its own citizens, that doesn't make them merciful people. It makes them terrible leaders in dereliction of duty. So, if we care for immigrants or speak up for them as their families are being ripped apart, then we're actually terrible leaders in dereliction of duty? We just have to stand by while Trump deports 4-year-old cancer patients? Again, false dichotomy. Perhaps the weirdest point Howerton makes is when he says Christians as individuals are commanded to love immigrants and should not let debates about immigration policy erode their love for immigrants as people. One false dichotomy here is in how he says Christians as individuals, as if Christians collectively can treat their neighbors completely differently. Also, he compares immigration policy with immigrants as people. Notice the alliteration. If you've listened to Howerton much, he seems to have the idea that using alliteration makes whatever he's saying wise. But when you consider what he's actually saying, he's pretending like we can divorce our policy toward people from our treatment of them, as if our policies can be cruel while we're still considered loving toward them as people. It's so exhausting, but I think the point is clear. Whether we're talking about the Minnesota shootings, the conflict in Iran, or immigration, on issue after issue, MAGA is offering up two completely ridiculous options in false dichotomy after false dichotomy. And it's leading to an infighting that some of their leaders fear may take down their movement entirely. As far as our response to all this goes, at the very least, I think the false dichotomies are pretty easy to spot. So as these stories unfold, maybe try finding some I haven't talked about here. If they're this overt in these 3 stories, they're likely present elsewhere too. And if we're aware of how they use this strategy, perhaps that can help us in figuring out how to point out the flaws in their proposals. Again, next week I'm going to be in St. Louis at the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship General Assembly, so if you're there, I'd love to meet you. And don't forget to sign up for the BNG breakfast if you haven't yet. Also, though I'll be there, I'll still be releasing episodes on Monday and Thursday at the usual times as well, so look for those when they come out. But that's it for today. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.